My wife Kim and I had planned our vacation for a year in advance, and we had previously hiked in 3 national park systems. This year we planned on spending a month exploring Zion and Bryce Canyons in Utah. We entered Utah at the Four Corners area and spent the night at a motel in Blanding. At dinner that evening, we met another couple who were also vacationing. They told us about the hike that they had just taken, and said the scenery defied description. We decided to deviate from our plans and explore in the area they mentioned. Early the next morning, we visited the local tourism building, and told them we needed maps and directions to this place named Dark Canyon. So we purchased several maps of the general area. Our backpacks were already filled with the basic necessities, and we topped them off with enough food and water to last us a week if necessary, because we had learned the hard way to pack extra, just in case. After a pleasant drive and then stopping at a visitor area, we quickly read the large, colorful maps and postings that directed hikers to the main trails. We compared the maps we had so that we were oriented as to which direction to head out. We followed the directions we received to the trailhead at the end of Wooden Shoe Road. We shouldered our heavy backpacks and started out by following the well-worn trail for about 4 miles until we reached Cherry Canyon. At this point we spotted another indistinct trail, and although it looked like it might be difficult, mainly only because it was curved to the left and it appeared to drop into the vast side of the canyon, at a steep slope too, we decided to venture off the beaten path and take this trail. The route wasn't well traveled, and the Park Service had obviously not spent time maintaining this trail, as we were constantly stepping over and around the rocks and debris that came from the canyon cliffs above. The trail seemed to discourage visitors, but made it more appealing as we liked discovering places not so heavily visited. As we made our way along the 2 to 3 foot wide trail, we were dropping at a rapid rate along a natural shelf that was almost like it had been formed by a volcanic flow of lava that oozed down a smooth path and left a perfect path for us to walk on. We did remark about the fact that our rapid progress would make it more difficult on the return trip, but we knew it would all average out in the end. The detailed map identified the rugged spires and monoliths that we had observed ahead of us as Badlands, which was to caution hikers to the fact that there were no maps of these side canyons and slot canyons that from a distance seemed impenetrable from where we were. Our goal was to reach the flat desert floor on this main route, and then to explore the many possibilities, hoping to find and photograph ancient petroglyphs that we anticipated would be there. We also hoped to find those unexplored areas that most hikers seem to pass through without observing much at all. Most visitors seem to be limited on time, so they want to see as much as possible as quickly as they can. Fortunately for us, we had all the time we wanted. It was getting late in the day, and as we were looking ahead for a good place to spend the night, a movement off to our left caught our attention. An animal of some sort was being attacked by a group of 4 large hawks. We figured it to be a young coyote as it appeared to scramble a ways, and then one of the hawks would swoop in, grab it, fly up a few feet, and then just drop it on the rocks. Then another would dive in on it with the same results. They seemed to be wearing it down by these series of attacks, and finally it must have had no strength left to continue fighting, and all 4 birds were devouring it. As we observed this scene play out, it showed us how tough life in these harsh lands must be. Then, as we watched, the afternoon sun illuminated an apparent path upward that we had not noticed before, as it was so obscure. Had we not been watching the coyote and secretly hoping it would get away, we never would have even spotted it. The path was more of a smooth floor between ridges, which obviously was used by a myriad of animals, but due to its beginning being dotted with some thorny bushes and a variety of cactus plants, humans would most assuredly pass it without even a second notice. We just had to take it. As we soon concluded, we were very likely to be one of the few people to have ever been here, as it appeared to be totally an animal trail with absolutely no sign of humans ever treading this ground. Since we came here for adventure, we tied a piece of red flagging material to some tall brush on the trail side to mark our return trail, and we began to slowly climb at a moderate angle. But We were in enough of a depression that we could no longer see the valley we had traveled through. We realized that the low ridge we were alongside must have kept this trail secret, hidden from exploration, as there wasn't a single boot print, cigarette butt, or piece of debris anywhere, as we almost always find in abundance in these areas. We continued to climb at a steady pace, and it was getting late. We began looking for a place to camp for the night. Our trail finally leveled off, and we were now curving further off to the right around a high cliff. And as we curved slowly around, there up the slope to our left, about 200 feet, was an apparent narrow slot canyon. So we climbed the slight incline until we reached the entrance. The canyon was narrow, almost like a large crack or slit in the 300-foot-high cliffside. It was about 10 feet wide with a flat, smooth sand floor. The canyon went back in about 100 feet and ended in an almost flat wall. There was a large boulder that had fallen from above, effectively blocking the canyon about 20 feet from the end. The boulder was around 15 feet in diameter and quite round. We decided to spend the night just inside this slot canyon. Kim began rolling our bedrolls out, and I searched around for signs of any ancient inhabitants. As I was looking around at the smooth canyon walls beyond the huge boulder, a streak of sunlight from the constantly changing earth rotation happened to appear on the other side of the large boulder. It didn't make sense, as it seemed to be coming directly from the side beyond and to the right of this slot canyon. I ran back to the boulder while calling to Kim to bring flashlights, and while she was digging out our lights, I wedged my foot between the boulder and the wall and clawed my way atop this monster rock. There to my right, perfectly obscured and invisible from the front of this canyon, was a large cut that ran back at a 45-degree angle toward the front of the cliff. It was another opening. Helping Kim to join me on the other side of the rock, we entered this new canyon immediately. It was about 5 feet wide and opened straight above our heads to the sky above. No wonder it was not visible from the entrance. It only became noticeable because of that momentary turning of the earth that permitted the sunlight to give away its existence. We walked slowly ahead, our way lighted by the slowly retreating sun, when suddenly this passage ended in a large circular cavern which must have been 30 feet wide and almost the same in length. The ceiling was covered like it was a cave, except for a large opening above that allowed the sun to illuminate the entire room, and also offered a shelter along its sides from occasional rains, which were apparently channeled along the walls of this room. It looked as if there were trenches on both sides that almost seemed like they were man-made in order to channel the runoff toward an outside exit. We made our way to the far end of this cave, and I leaned through the side opening far enough to view the valley floor far below, to what appeared to be a separate canyon from the one we had just left. We immediately made the decision to spend the night in this cavern, as it was an adventure like no other we could imagine. I returned to the original entrance and climbed back over the large boulder and passed our backpacks and bedrolls over to Kim, and then joined her to return to our cave. Once we retrieved our flashlights, we began to explore our new hideout. This is when we discovered we were not alone. When we first entered the cave, I had left my canteen just inside the entrance, but upon returning, it was not there. As we began searching the areas of this cave, there was my canteen in the far corner of the cave. It looked as though it had just been tossed aside. It was also at an angle with the cap down against the wall. An angle I surely would never have left a canteen, especially not my own. We searched carefully with both lights, along with our fluorescent lantern, which we positioned in the center of the room so we would have sufficient light. In the far corner, which would have been almost even with the original slot's end, which would put it to be about 20 feet beyond the boulder, we spotted an almost undetectable and very narrow crack in the wall. I shone my light inside this passage that proved to be about 2 feet wide, and the crack reached upward where it was impossible for us to tell how high. This passage seemed to go on into the mountain so far that even my powerful flashlight couldn't illuminate it enough to see if it ended or just curved from sight. And now we were nervous, but our combined thoughts, did not put us in fear, as it could have just been a coyote, or maybe even a curious ground squirrel, or just another small animal that moved the canteen, even as heavy as it was. Being thoroughly exhausted by a very long and strenuous hike, we had a quick meal of trail mix, and we laid our sleeping bags in such a way that we could see the night sky, and both fell asleep extremely quickly. Sometime later, I awoke to Kim's scream, and I grabbed my light and my revolver at the same time. Kim was cringing in fear, shaking uncontrollably. I played my light around the room and caught just a glimpse of a shadow at the entrance of this cavern. I didn't dare fire a shot, as I didn't have a clear target, and also there was that unknown result of the damage that a gunshot would cause, like a cave-in. Kim was almost in a state of shock. She said someone had felt her face, and it felt like a hairy or furry hand, but she distinctly felt that it had long claws, and she had 4 red marks on her cheeks to show for it. My watch showed it to be about 2 a.m., so we decided to leave the fluorescent light on low and tried to take turns dozing off until daylight, figuring that whatever it was seemed just as afraid as my wife was. So I hoped they both preferred to have no more contact with one another. Kim had finally fallen asleep, and I was on my side facing her when I saw our mysterious visitor. It was slowly creeping toward us from the entrance, and I squinted my eyes, pretending to be asleep, while reaching very slowly until my hand found my gun. The creature was moving almost imperceptibly towards Kim, so slow you couldn't even see it, and as I grasped my fingers around the butt of my revolver, I slowly moved my arm until it was in ready position, while all the time squinting as though my eyes were closed. And just as the intruder began to reach a long claw towards Kim, I bolted up and pulled the trigger. I had considered whether I would dare to shoot if the animal had returned, and since it was only a .22 caliber gun, it really made more noise than anything. But in the confined cave, it was truly deafening. Kim screamed as the animal shrieked a horrible sound and the cave lit up. The explosion seemed huge, and the black hairy beast literally flew up and whirled out the entrance. The flash of the gun along with the lantern gave me a good look at it. It had long, black, very fine hair all over it that waved in the wind as it ran. Its long claws were very prominent, and it was quite thin. And its eyes, I'll never forget those eyes. They were yellow, and they almost seemed to be glowing like they had a light behind them. It was apparent before I even fired the shot that it gave off a glow of its own from behind those eyes. Being as how it had been stooped over, and when it ran it seemed almost spider-like in its movements, I couldn't begin to estimate its size or weight, but my guess would be if it stood straight, it would have had to have been at least 6 or 7 feet tall. And as you can guess, that did it for us. With the fluorescent on high, we gathered our equipment, rolled up our sleeping gear, and prepared to leave. It was at that time that we noticed that this cavern did show signs of occupancy that we had clearly missed before. There were mounds of sand that we ended up allocating time to dig up. As curious as we were, and after being attacked by such a mysterious thing, we just had to know. In the digging, we revealed piles of bones and shards of what seemed to be pottery. Not sure whether we were wishing we could take it all back, or wishing we had time to explore this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, we were becoming more concerned with our safety. We climbed back over the boulder in the slot canyon, and we again made it to the outside. We both breathed a huge sigh of relief when suddenly our scary visitor dashed by us and ducked behind a rock beside the trail. The sky had lighted enough that we were both able to see it plainly, and it must have actually thought it was hidden because it grunted like it was afraid when it bolted. While Kim held the lantern, I followed it around the rock, revolver in one hand, flashlight in the other. I jumped quickly around the side of the rock and startled a large coyote. The coyote quickly scampered around the rock outcropping and disappeared. There was no sign of our big, scary creature. As I shined my light around, there on the sand beneath my feet were some wet spots, and under my light it appeared to be blood. Then on a white piece of granite, the red was very obvious. It actually had been blood. We huddled against the cliff face for a long time, feeling this was enough adventure for 10 trips. So at the first wisps of daylight, we we headed back, retracing our steps with much more speed than we had arrived with. We didn't stop to rest until the sun was up and we were miles from the cave. It was past sunset when we arrived back at the parking area, and ours was the only vehicle left. We used the restrooms, and then as we settled into our seats, we heard the most reassuring of all sounds. Our engine started. That has always been a fearful thought, being stranded in the middle of nowhere and the car won't start, especially after the kind of experience we just had. We slowly pulled out of the parking lot and took the road back toward the highway. It was still quite dark in the valley, and the deep shadows of this rough dirt road made it necessary to go slow to avoid the multiple potholes left from the spring thaw. The road curved and ran back to the easterly side of where we had hiked, and as I was about to mention something about the mountain peak where we had just been, Kim screamed, "Look out!" I grasped the wheel harder as I hit the brakes while following her gaze, and then I saw it too. A tall, spidery figure with long, stringy hair running alongside the car, and when I sped up to get away, it ran faster. It was the same frightening thing we had encountered on our hike. When I glanced at my speedometer, we were moving 60 miles an hour. It was all I could do to hold the wheel and try to avoid these larger potholes, yet the creature stayed right alongside Kim's window. Suddenly, headlights from an approaching vehicle appeared ahead of us, and I was forced to ease off the accelerator with a sigh of relief. And when we were about 100 yards from meeting, I slowed even more and asked Kim what our lanky friend was doing. She said, as I assumed, with the headlights approaching, it was gone. Then, as we were meeting the other vehicle, she shouted, "Look!" And as I turned to see what she was looking at, there, running at an angle away from the road, was a coyote. But it had been running on 2 legs, its hind leg. It also seemed to have that same wispy black pelt as the spidery creature that had been terrorizing us. Could they have possibly exchanged appearances? I don't know. I don't care. I was just real glad to get out of these frightening canyons in one piece. We vowed never to return to this haunted canyon again. This is a story told to me by a man only known as Crow. A man from the reservation just delivered a bull to a buyer's ranch, out to the far reaches of the reservation, getting lost for a couple hours in the process. It's a large expanse of land, and what maps are available aren't always reliable. Anyway, it's late and getting towards dark by the time he gets back on the main road towards home. Just as he gets to the intersection where there's a stop sign, he sees there up ahead, right in the middle of the road, a lone coyote. It's just standing there. So before he starts driving, he leans on the horn. In response, he watches as the coyote rises up on its back leg, assumes the form of a man, only his legs and feet, arms and hands seemed more canine than human, and with a spastic gait starts walking towards the opposite shoulder. The man, not believing what he's seeing, closed his eyes and starts shaking his head. When he again looks, there's the coyote sitting off to the side of the road and looking back at him, as if it's waiting for him to drive by. The man, now certain it's the light playing tricks on him, and then the fact that it's been a long and draining drive, he does just that. He passes right by. But as he passes the coyote, he gives it a quick look, and sees that it is grinning back at him in a way that is all too human. Having heard stories of skinwalkers, the man blesses himself, and fixing his eyes on the road straight ahead, steps on the gas pedal. Now, my friend Crow is an extremely honest and good man. I've never known him to make up any stories. He claims to personally know this man, and that he completely believes this story. I personally hope it's not true. I am Navajo. We had an incident with an unwelcome visitor in our home, and here's what happened. My cousin was sleeping over, and he's the same age as me. We were both 13 at the time. We were in my room talking and hanging out, and it was around 11 p.m. It was a pleasant summer evening, so my window was wide open, and it was pretty dark outside. My dad was in the living room, supposedly watching TV, but as always, he dozed off on the couch. My mom had already gone to bed. My cousin and I are keeping it down, but not yet ready to call it a night. All of a sudden, we hear the screen door to the front of the house open and then slam shut. We think it's my dad, but shortly after, my mom, she tells us this the next day anyway, claims she hears footprints on the carpet. Whoever it is, she says, goes through her room and towards the bathroom. She also naturally assumes it's my dad. Then she comes to the realization that she is unable to move, as if she's paralyzed. Still in my room, my cousin and I again hear the screen door open and slam, only much louder this time. It wakes up my dad and he comes to my bedroom checking on us. Finding us both there, he wants to know which one of my friends just slipped out of the house. It takes a few minutes, but we convince him that we are by ourselves and that we had been. We also explain that we thought it was him going in and out. I can see by the look on his face that he's not really buying it, but he has to admit we don't seem to be lying. He leaves, and as he's closing the door to my room, he tells us to stay out of trouble and go to sleep. All we can do is shrug. The next morning, my mom tells us what she heard and how she could not move. She also tells us that the second time the door slams, she hears what sounds like horse hooves run by her bedroom window. She has us all pray. We went outside to look, and we found the horse hooves about 40 yards past the house. The hooves slowly faded into human tracks. We followed them for about a mile, but they just disappeared. This brief encounter takes place the summer my boyfriend and I became engaged. I was certain it was a dark omen for things to come. The sun had just slipped behind the hills to the west. It was a beautiful night with a cool breeze coming out of the north. A perfect setting for taking a walk with someone you love. My fiancé and I set out just past the property, making our way leisurely across this open field and down toward a creek. As soon as we neared the trees, I noticed a tall, upright shadow. It suddenly shrunk down and slipped to the back of this majestic cedar that stands about 100 feet from the creek. I immediately stopped in my tracks, holding my fiancé's hand even tighter. I pointed to the tree and told him what I saw. He bent and picked up a few stones from the ground, and with his left hand, he moved me to his back as if for protection. He then took a few steps forward, and with his right hand threw the rocks towards the tree. His second throw hit it square. Immediately, a huge brown owl took to flight, soaring out over the creek. I have never seen one this big in these parts. The wings had a span longer than my arm. It might have been dusk, but I know that what I saw duck behind that tree was no owl. I believe whatever it was transformed itself and then flew off. In fact, I'm convinced. There's no other possible answer. After that, our summer took on a turn for the worse. My fiancé and I saw owls more than we'd ever seen before. Every time we went out of the house, every time we looked out the window, and every time we saw one, something would go wrong. We did, however, get married, and so far so good. Stay safe. Thank you for reading my story.